Good afternoon, everyone. I will now call the January 29th, 2025 Policy Committee to order. Ms. Harrison, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Representing Educational District 5, Ms. Erica Mitchell.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 7, Mr. Alfred Chivy Brooks.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 8, Ms. Cynthia Briscoe Brown.
Present.
Representing Educational District 2, Ms. Aretta Bowden. She's not on the committee, but she is present. Also, I would like to recognize Madam General Counsel Nina Gupta is also present. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Now we entertain a motion to approve the November 2024 Policy Committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved by Board Member Alfred Chivy Brooks, second by Board Member Cynthia Briscoe Brown. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the January 29th, 2025 Policy Committee agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, second by Board Member Brooks. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Today we have a couple of items we want to discuss for policy. I'm just going to go through some of the items that we're looking to move forward with discussion. One, a follow-up with student discipline practice discussion. Two, recommendation of retention and placement policy committee discussion. Policy IHE, promotion and retention, first read. Policy GAG, staff conflict of interest for discussion. And policy diet discussion. And we have Ashley Paz here on behalf of the Council of Great City Schools Student Outcome Focused Governance Framework to kind of give us a high-level overview of policy diet. And so we'll bring her up a little bit later this afternoon. I'm not going to say this evening, but this afternoon. So I just want to break down the agenda for today, and I will turn it over to Erica Long for the first item we will discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Board Chair, and thanks everyone for convening this afternoon. We wanted to bring from the administration two follow-ups on some policy issues that we have discussed with you all over the past several months. Let's start with a follow-up on our student discipline practices from Lincoln Woods and Chelsea Montgomery. They put together a cross-functional task force that has worked collaboratively, including voices from principals, from schools, from the central office, to talk through some of the issues and concerns you all have raised around our student discipline practices. I'll turn it over to you two. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. We're excited to bring this back to Policy Committee, and we actually have two really exciting topics today, so I'm really glad to be here. So with that, we will start. I'm Chelsea Montgomery, Assistant Super Student Services here in APS, and we have
Lincoln Woods III, Director of Student Discipline here at APS.
So I'll get us started reviewing our agenda. So we're going to review the policy considerations that we discussed before, discuss the feedback process that we went through, and then go through some recommendations that came forward for your consideration. So the process. So in June 2024, we brought the current landscape of student discipline matters and things that kind of were coming up to Policy Committee. Then in August of 2024, we narrowed down those areas of inquiry, and then we provided all of that data that we looked at then. Given that data and the Policy Committee's feedback, we convened a stakeholder group. We met 3 different times to obtain feedback on those considerations, and we also, Mr. Woods went to Student Advisory and had a discussion with them about the 3 areas for consideration as well, and then brings us back to today. Here we are with the recommendations that we found, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Woods.
All right, thank you. I really appreciate it. So as she said, there were recommendations obtained from not only the Policy Review Committee, which consists of several leaders throughout the district, principals, assistant principals, and so forth, but we also were able to touch in with our Student Advisory Committee as well. And what's so unique about that group is that you have leaders, student leaders that represent all of our high schools, as well as I can remember leaders from Drew Charter and Kip Collegiate. So it was a really cool, awesome group to meet with. All right, so the first area of inquiry dealt with one policy consideration dealing with the suspensions of our K-3 students. So we had banning out-of-school suspension at certain grade levels with, of course, excluding dangerous offenses. And we're familiar with the big three, and if you're not, that deals with weapons and drugs and things of that nature. Next, we had expand on the Georgia Code 2220-2-742, which deals with the behavior plan, incorporating a behavior plan after 5 days of suspension or more, 5 days of suspension to more grade levels, and then requiring approval for out-of-school suspension at certain grade levels. And as we looked into this, and as you can see before, and I kind of took some notes on this to prevent from having to go deep into the study for Annenberg Brown study, but I know when they considered it, I was really surprised and thrilled that particular reform reduced the black and white out-of-school suspension gap by 79%. So I think that this is really good that we're looking at how we approach the K-3 student suspensions. So the recommendation from the stakeholder committee was to keep the current policy on being able to suspend K-3 students, of course, considering the dangerous offenses. But we also came back and we had a recommendation from the student service leadership, and that was that we should consider adding that cluster superintendents must approve any K-3 suspensions at the third consecutive day or more. And that third consecutive day is to kind of be proactive or an attempt to be proactive before we even get into 5 days or more as it relates to suspension.
Excuse me, Mr. Woods, before we move away from that point, I don't see it spelled out here, but I think you made a really important data point around the disparity. Do you mind repeating that? You were saying that if we address one of the policy considerations, it reduces the disparity by 79% between black and white students.
Yes. So in that particular case, the reform reduced the black and white out-of-school suspension gap by 79%.
Which reform?
The Annenberg study, Annenberg-Brown study.
Requiring approval for OSS at certain grade levels?
Yes, and I also want to say that the study was actually done by Annenberg Brown, but it was done in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. That's where the district that the research was done in.
And for our purposes, those grade levels would be K-3.
Yes.
And I'm sure it's probably something we're going to want to review over time. Like, you're not going to be able to get through it right now.
The link is
Yeah.
live.
Yes, the link is.
It's 74 pages.
I'll check the digital one.
Yeah,
We'll save the earth today.
It's a pretty lengthy study.
Yeah, let's do that.
For sure. That's why our kids need printed books.
I take that national scanning recommendation seriously, so that's where we found that.
Right on, right on. And I guess the question is, and I don't want to just start hitting y'all with questions, but man, this is like good stuff, and I am grateful to hear like there are things that we can look at that are actionable, but if we could reduce the disparity 79% K-3 by requiring the additional approval, what stops us from having that same practice through middle school? Or is there any reason not to have that practice through middle school? Especially because the spike is in like 6th grade and 5th grade. Like that's where it really spikes up. I'll take that as an affirmative or like.
Yeah, honestly, yeah,
Okay.
I really can't think of anything that would stop it. And it makes me think about some of the things we have in place right now for our exceptional ed students. So that we do have some guardrails in place where the self and the principal needs to be consulted with, for lack of a better word, in reference to before suspending those students, because we do have thresholds in reference to, hey, this student this under the exceptional ed umbrella is at 5 days. Now they're at 10 days. So I think if we take maybe a similar approach for all of our students, general ed included, we could possibly see that disparity and that gap decrease.
Is the focus on K-3 here, because I think that's the question we asked, whether banning OSS for K-3 would be something that we would want to explore from a policy level. So I don't know that we, I think that was the specific question we
Right.
asked.
That we didn't really ask them to think beyond, I guess, is that what you're saying?
Right.
I
We
agree.
didn't say
Yeah.
ban OSS
Correct.
K-7. What does the committee think of that?
Correct.
What I think we asked was about K through 3.
The original ask was K3, but then when we came back to the committee in, I think that was August, that we were encouraged to look wider, just especially with the number 2 consideration about
Yeah.
those behavior plans. Board Member Brooks, I remember you specifically asking about that one. So we did look wider. I really like the research, and the Annenberg study is very clearly K3, and that was the original ask. So I tied those two things together. The other thing that I think is for consideration, especially when you look back at that study, is the cluster superintendent level. Some other districts have done this. They've had the superintendent, they've had a deputy superintendent, they've had a chief, they've had a cluster. So at what level that approval is required, there is some variance in the effectiveness. But that's where the Annenberg Brown most replicable is, so that's why we made that recommendation, but there is variance in that level of approval.
And what type of variance did you see?
Not
Like,
significant, and there were much
Okay.
smaller districts. So that,
So if we had area superintendents be the additional approval, Lord knows Johnson's doing enough. He doesn't need all those phone
Right.
calls, right?
right, yes.
And people get paid to do this stuff. So, yeah, okay. thank you.
The cluster superintendent level keeps it at a level that's very responsive to the principals, where they're working with their direct leader and someone who intentionally has spent a lot of time in that school space. With respect to the middle school question, I wonder if it is a good idea to ease into this, and let's start with the K-3 level. I worry about middle school capacity when you think about the number of incidents that our students are engaging with at that level. Whether we, just not wanting to inundate the principals or the cluster supes with this heightened scrutiny over an OSS decision.
Yeah, I received that feedback. My thought is when 40% of your suspensions are a result of student to adult interactions, you got to do something. And truth be told, like these type of interactions that cause like the suspensions are happening predominantly to like 5th and 6th grade. And so it's like, I receive what you're saying, but at the same time, we've been in a practice that has gone on for so long that has created this wide disparity. It's not just in Atlanta, it's like everywhere. And so it's one of those things that we got to make sure that kids are at school. And if we're not getting in the way of personalities being the problem, then I don't know. I just feel like maybe we're not doing our job.
So my question is, and I know I'm just coming late to the party, but I'm here. The root cause on why the suspension has happened K through 3. Like, I kind of want to talk a little bit backwards. What type of behaviors are we seeing in this subgroup of students where we have to do out-of-school suspension?
So what we've seen this year and even last year, and believe it or not, even as young as kindergarten and first graders, and that's battery to a school employee. So we thought out of the box and just within our reach of resources that we have here. So things like mindset training and de-escalation training, we've consulted with different schools. I know I even reached out to one school, and I was really glad that they completely said, hey, we want this so bad, not only for our upper grade teachers, but we're gonna use this in place of a faculty meeting. We're gonna get everybody trained at one time to just work on de-escalation. And then of course, the mindset training deals with just restraint. because sometimes if you know a kid is aggressive, you shouldn't, you don't want to be that close to a kid, because at any given time that kid, so now we have an adult that's been battered, and we probably could have proactively avoided that.
And then with the students, what are we putting in place? Do we have, the behavior specialist, the BCABA, the RBT, like just all of those things when you're dealing with those type of aggressive behavior that are showing up?
Yeah, so we have 2 Gen Ed BCBAs, which is a unique thing to APS, and it's a great resource. They go out with all of our kids that are in Tier 3 behavior that need behavior intervention plans. We get them deployed as fast as we can. The other thing I would say is the other place for variance, for the policy committee to consider, is that 3rd consecutive day or more. That's another place that can vary. Also, I want to point out too is we see some of those classroom challenges. So we've launched a classroom management coaching academy. It starts a shameless plug. It starts in 2 weeks, and it's really to train a classroom management coach in every building. So someone that already is an instructional coach or an MTSS specialist or behavior specialist. I've checked this morning, we have 48 people signed up for that coaching academy. So that really will help people to have on-site level classroom management coaching available.
And with
No, go ahead.
with these things that are being put in place and being implemented, we should see some type of reduction. But more so, and I'm speaking to the prevention and the intervention approach that's being done before we get to what we have to do, suspension. So those are in place. Then we have this as that kind of guardrail around what we can and what will allow, will not allow. And so that's giving me ease knowing that we're doing all the prevention, intervention in the school level, and then before we get here. And I'll go ahead, Board Member Brooks, you had
No, I just think about like a lot of the feedback that we get from students, specifically, when we're going to the breakfast with the board. Oftentimes, I'm listening to the piece about classroom management, and what I guess what I know just from lived experience is that the best classroom management is being an engaging teacher, and I think one of the things that I've been hearing from students over and over and over again is like, man, I just really want teachers that are interested. I really want teachers who are engaging. Teachers know content, they know the pedagogy, but the delivery is like, okay, like it's they're wanting some more. And I'm just wanting to encourage our team and you guys to like be intentional about trying to find opportunities to enrich teachers on the engagement side. And I'm from my experience, I have never had a PD on engagement, ever. And it's just kind of one of those things where it's either a teacher has it or they don't, but every teacher could have it, and I don't know if we're doing enough to support them in that way. So I just wanted to encourage that, because I do think it's also tied into this discipline piece, because when kids are not interested, they get into other things, or they avoid school or avoid class. And so that was just my piece on that, just if we could be intentional about engagement.
It's a section in the Classroom Management Coaching Academy, actually, increasing those opportunities to respond. So increasing the opportunities that kids have to respond to the instruction is a great instructional strategy and a classroom management strategy. So it is a whole component of the Classroom Management Coaching Academy. It's actually classroomcheckup.org is the resources that we're using. It's free. It's IES federal grant funded. Hopefully the website stays up because I need all of those resources. But if you want to check it out, it is in there. But there's a whole, one of the 6 principles of the Coaching Academy is engagement.
Yes, what I'm saying is that like engagement needs to absolutely be centered. Like I actually feel like it's something that specifically we should be focused on. And that, there's a level of showmanship and a level of, and we see it with our lower grades where teachers are singing with their kids, they're dancing with their kids, they're like engaged. But come middle school and high school, us teachers, we kind of lay back a little bit. We don't give that same spark, and I think, our teachers really need to be intentional about that spark. Otherwise, we could do all the other things correct, but the delivery fall flat, and then we don't get what we invested in. My 2 cents, I digress.
Yeah, I thank you. That was great. I appreciate that. I want to bring us back to a sort of a procedural level here. We've been talking about this a long time. By the way, thanks to whoever was on the stakeholder committee. I think from looking at this, it looks like they really were thoughtful and intentional and engaged. and did great work. So whoever that is, if you will pass that along to them with our thanks. I heard Erica Long suggest that maybe we try this approach with the cluster superintendents at the K-3 level and get some data on that, see if it helps. I don't have any discipline policy information. I have your presentation, but I can't find that right now while I'm also listening to you. Is this a policy level? Is this something that needs to rise to the level of policy right now, particularly if we want to add the cluster superintendent piece at K-3 and see how that works?
So this change could be added to the Student Code of Conduct, which is an administrative regulation, which allows us the flexibility to make those changes to how we operate student discipline without coming to the board.
I would be very much in favor of seeing that, and there are probably some other things in here that we're going to have the same reaction to, that might be a place to handle this,
Yes.
at least initially, and then see whether we need a policy, since I know the last item on our agenda is a policy diet. I don't want to be unnecessarily adding policies. So I think it would be understanding that, except at the policy level, we can't insist that this happen. It would seem to me that you would be willing to implement this and try this, and then maybe come back to us and give us a report on how it went.
So basically, we need a consensus from the committee that we agree in agreement with this recommendation.
Well, and that we are in agreement that we are not going to handle it at the policy level at this time.
Well, this recommendation for this to be added to regulation, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what we're discussing.
But my only encouragement for us is not to limit ourselves to K-3, because, and the reason why K-3 is being brought up is, that was that's kind of what preceded the conversation, and then there was an actual study that focused specifically on that. But that doesn't limit where the benefit could extend to, because our real pain point when it comes to just the actual quantity of suspensions is at 5th, 6th grade. And so if you stop at 3rd, then you're not really biting as much of the apple as you could.
Can I ask a question that might help give some context to that issue? Can you all give us a sense of the types of out-of-school suspensions that you've seen that a cluster superintendent may not approve for a K-3 student? Like, we talked through the example of student battery against a teacher, against an employee. Like, that's going to be pretty clear-cut. But what are some of the incidents where you've seen a student get out-of-school suspension, and with this heightened scrutiny of the cluster superintendent signing off, it might be the case that it does not become an OSS?
I think one that stands out for me, well, two, would be leaving school grounds. I know that I've seen a situation where a student has been suspended for either just eloping and running out of class, because it pulls on so many human resources. People get emotional, they get upset about it. You're having to run or either chase, for lack of a better word, and find that student. For a safety standpoint, everybody's under this fear factor because if the student leaves the building, crosses the street, now you have another safety concern. So leaving the classrooms, eloping, leaving school grounds, and then sometimes it's just your basic 2nd grade or 3rd grade fight. And then definitely when it's a 5th grader, because they're bigger, stronger, so that fight kind of comes off a little bit more egregious.
Thank you for that. We can move on to the area number 2.
Okay, all right. And just to address what Board Member Brooks was saying, we are still encouraging, and I think this is why I can kind of highlight a lot of our elementary school principals as well as assistant principals in reference to the data decreasing, and that's the alternative to suspension. So at the end of the day, policy or no policies, we still want to push and encourage, utilize some of our alternatives to suspension. Look in the student code of conduct in the handbook and look at the progressive discipline interventions. Look at the interventions, the restorative circles, the counseling, exercise as many of these as you can before suspending. And then sometimes it's just the number. A student may get suspended, but can we consider 1 day versus suspending this 4th or 5th grader for 4 or 5 days? All right, moving along to the second inquiry. It was dealing with banning out-of-school suspension for students identified as homeless per the McKinney-Vento law, and of course, excluding dangerous offenses. So after careful review and meeting with the stakeholder committee, they actually landed on continuing to apply discipline as outlined by the Code of Conduct. So they feel like even though some of these students fall under the McKinney-Vento law, we should handle all of the students from an equitable standpoint and handle them the same.
Can you explain the
Yes.
thought process on that?
Sure.
More so around the students that are homeless. Like, how are we treating those students differently from other students? If they're homeless, they have a different situation that they're dealing with. So what you're saying is that they want the same type of treatment regardless of their situation.
Yes. And again, it was a committee of several individuals, so I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we did have a few committee members that were leaning towards one side versus the other. But of course, within any stakeholder committee, when you're trying to get to a decision, you kind of go with the majority vote. So while we had some stakeholders within the committee that wanted to consider, like, well, because things came out of it in reference to students being homeless, where they're coming from, where they're being housed, and being maybe late to school. So tardiness was something that was posed. And then sometimes a student not being, I guess, a student that's homeless and not actually being in that home such as their peers. And then sometimes students are finding out about that, and it creates, I want to say bullying was one of the things that was thrown out, because sometimes students, somehow they find out about each other's business really easy. So when you find out that this student is homeless or this student is being dropped off and you can tell it's not by a parent or they're not riding the bus or whatever the case may be, sometimes now that's a justification by that student. So a lot of conversations came out of it, but I think the majority vote was from that equitable standpoint. And then even someone brought up the fact that some students have, well, not, this wouldn't be students, but this would be parents in reference to falling under this and claiming homelessness, but not, and then we're coming back and doing research and finding out that that wasn't the case because of maybe wanting to be in this particular school or another school. So it's a lot of red tape around it, but ultimately I feel like the majority of the committee members landed on, let's move forward with applying discipline for everyone the same way, because they were thinking from an equitable standpoint.
Are we able to have a little better understanding about who the members of this committee are?
Sure,
And where they came from with schools, even if you don't, I don't know that you want to
Yeah.
name people, but
Not
so
name,
without
but we
calling,
can- we don't wanna
without,
Get it later.
yeah.
yeah, definitely, without,
By characteristic.
Yes, thank you.
So I would say elementary, middle, and high school, we definitely had representation. We made sure that we had at least a principal from all three levels. And then it was also coupled with quite a few assistant principals all over the district. We were really intentional in making sure that we had representation from as far as you can go south and towards maybe the South Atlanta area, and as far as you can go north, with representation from North Atlanta cluster. We made sure that we had representation from all clusters. And then, of course, we wanted to make sure that all three levels were represented, elementary, middle, and high.
I'll say too, we were the listeners, right? We were not participating on the committee. There was less discussion about this than I think I anticipated. There was a pretty clear consensus, and really, not really the word equitable, the word equal, an equal application of the code of conduct, that at the end of the day, the student violated the code of conduct regardless of their circumstances, and the committee it was a clear consensus.
Yeah. No, I think that leads us to a really good point, is that often adults look at things for, what is equal and not what is equitable. And what is equal is not always equitable. And so when you do take on that lens, you create unequitable policies. And I think when you look at a student and you say, well, this kid has nowhere to actually go home to for out of school suspension, there's a level of callousness about that. And I think that's something that we need to honestly take a deep look at in ourselves, and actually why I'm grateful that we have a board and we're not governed just by what administrators think should happen.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what I hear you saying that the committee was concerned about is that creating a special category for McKinney-Vento students with reference to discipline concerned them. And I can share that concern because I think we have students who have so many different kinds of needs, challenges, things going on in their lives. A student may not be subject to McKinney-Vento, for instance, but may be in an insecure housing situation. McKinney-Vento has very specific requirements, and they may not quite meet those requirements. Or a student, I know sometimes discipline issues are affected by what's going on between adults in the home. So a student that's bouncing back and forth between two parents who are breaking up unpleasantly can also affect that. Right now, we have a lot of students who are very concerned about their parents' status and are very stressed out about that. And so while I hope that homeless status is included in any decision about discipline, I also hope that all of the other factors that make up what our children are going through and what their lived experience is are also considered in that. And so all of that is to say, it sounds like the committee had a concern about pulling out one need at the expense of others. And I don't know that that's inequitable, but I hear you. I think it might be, another way to look at that might be that they were concerned about lifting up one need and not lifting up others. And if we lift up all of them, then we don't even have a discipline process.
Yeah, no,
We don't even have a code of conduct if everybody gets accepted from it.
Yeah, I very much appreciate you giving me that way to look at it. What I think is we don't make our best policies when we make policies out of concern. I believe we make our best policies when we operate in courage. And so if you have the courage to say we need to set aside for these particular students in these particular circumstances, we need the courage to elevate other students who have these needs. The reality is that the way our discipline has operated, not just in Atlanta, but in many other places across this country, is with a lack of consideration of the nuanced needs of so many different students, and it's why we have the outcomes that we have now. The beauty of this city, this school district, this superintendent, this board, is that you have a courageous board who's willing to take on the challenges and create those set-asides and carve-outs and acknowledge those nuances and those different needs. That's why we have a whole equity department and why we stand in the gap. And I think it's our job to do. And so, the truth be told, a lot of the discipline that we do in school is because we're not doing some of the other things well. It's really about that, right? And so these are effectively like the guardrails that we're trying to set up right now. And I don't mind if you got 5, 6, 7, 10, 20 groups of kids that you're looking at in a special kind of way because you're trying to do the best thing for them. I have no feels about that.
I don't want to cross committees, but I want to bring up something that came up in our audit that I think is relevant to this. In our audit, it was, and with the discipline department, it was noted that every school didn't have ISS. So when we were talking about this, saying if the premise is they don't have a home to go to, is ISS the middle ground?
That's right.
So that I just think is relevant to this discussion, because that is something that was identified by audit committee as a challenge, that every school doesn't offer ISS. Every high school actually doesn't even offer ISS. So
Really?
And that's what I wanted
Yeah.
to expand upon, because we have a lot of partnerships, and I'll bring this one back up. We have at Promise Center that
right.
was
That's right.
developed by former Mayor Cassine Reed to be kind of an intervention for our students. If they couldn't, they were suspended out of school, then they could go to the At Promise Center. So I'm looking at how are we utilizing these other alternatives, because, at the end of the day, policies are written to serve students. They're written to serve. And we're saying we can do this for one, we can't do this for the other, but they have unique circumstances. So my question is, what other alternatives are put in place? Because from the way I'm looking at it is, we suspend you, you don't come back to school, you don't have a place to live. How is that helping that student?
And it's ironic that you mentioned that. I guess I'll throw in my shameless plug, but I'm literally probably as close as you can possibly be in reference to getting legal to approve my MOU with the At Promise Center. And it's basically an intervention, alternative to suspension approach. We couldn't do an in lieu of suspension, but again, it's an alternative to suspension where literally we want to have certified teachers, both gen ed and special ed, housed at the At Promise Center where they can receive all of those services. And at all of the At Promise Centers, you have the Big Brothers, Big Sisters, you have the Chris 180, you have all of those supports and wraparound services. So hopefully, again, like I said, I'm this close to hopefully getting that MOU approved, but it's almost like,
Let me say this, we're gonna cross every T and dot every I.
And
I've also been a little bit of a nightmare being protective of our student data that we're sharing and those kinds of things. So we've been going through this.
And not to cross committees, but there's also the investment in these resources. So the work at the At Promise Center comes with a cost to the district. So as we're looking at our priorities and your priorities as a board in terms of where we invest those resources, this is a potential solution to the problem of protecting that instructional space. With respect to this discipline stakeholder committee, principals were concerned about how they protect instructional time when you're dealing with disciplinary infractions, even from students, yes, who happen to be homeless. We have to be careful. This is not necessarily the exceptional education space where sometimes the behavior is a manifestation of that issue. Where can we impose standards and expectations appropriately on all of our students and do that in a way that empowers teachers and principals to protect and maximize that precious instructional time as well?
Yeah, what I don't want to be heard is that when we talk about acknowledging the specific needs of some students, is to say that to absolve them of discipline. I don't want that to be heard. It's just that you have to address it differently, right? And so, and I appreciate you bringing up the At Promise thing, because I've evolved on it. I remember when it was first brought up, I was like, hold on, what are we talking about? We're partnering with the Atlanta Police Foundation. Okay, what are we talking about right now, right? And I had feels about that, and I took the time to go to that Promise Center and visit and see all the things. I did my due diligence, and I agree. It provides a level of wraparound services and access that we don't provide. And I think it's the right approach at a very vulnerable moment for some of our most vulnerable kids. What we got to do better is the transportation piece. And connecting, making sure that our kids have access to it if they are going there, right? And so I think we have some gaps that we have to fill that I heard from them, and I'd love to work with you guys, from the board perspective of how we could support better to bridge that gap. But I agree. I think, there are just alternative ways to do it. We're not saying, you just can do whatever you want to do. That I don't want that to be heard. So I just want to be clear. Yeah.
Yes.
I want to circle back to your comment about ISS and about not all schools not having ISS. Is that a a funding issue? Is that something we need to look at as part of the budget for an FTE to make sure that there are that principals have the ability to fund somebody to do ISS, or what?
I think it's probably, in speaking with a few principals and assistant principals, I think I would say it's three different things. One, in some cases, our funding, like I really needed an additional counselor or a behavior specialist versus an ISS person. In some cases, it's ISS and the effectiveness of it. I've heard that literally. Some assistant principals and principals don't believe in ISS because they feel like students go there and they may still get in trouble, and now they're being pulled on, or
Yeah.
they're not scared to go to ISS. And scared, for lack of a better word, but it's not like corrective. Oh, I want to go to ISS, send me. So, and then the third thing would be, what's my thought? So one, funding, two, the effectiveness of it, and I don't think that was it. I just had a memory lapse, but it was it was a third one.
You're too young to be having senior
I
moments.
know, right?
It happens, man. It happens.
But it was a third one that they mentioned in reference to ISS. But I know those were the top two in reference to ISS and OSS.
I literally just had a conversation about this yesterday with a parent. One of the issues that was brought to me was that the ISS positions are earned, not funded in our district. And so that autonomy for a principal to either fund an ISS person or not creates the gap of whether or not the service is even available on a regular basis or not.
And that was my third one. It was a choice.
I got you, brother.
Yep.
Alley-oop,
So it was
alley-oop,
funding.
alley-oop.
Sometimes you have the funding, but it's just like, I choose not to have it. I'd rather do something else totally
Right.
different with my money.
Because you may
I
have a
it.
lower suspension rate at your school, so you feel like it's not justified to fund.
So just to clarify, so it is, every middle and high school is funded a 1.0 ISS position. It's the flexibility and whether or not they choose to use it.
Got it. Okay. So the funding is there, but it's part of that bucket of funds that we, under our
Flexible.
flexibility and autonomy,
Yes.
allow principals to make those decisions for themselves.
Correct, but it is allocated to every middle and high school for a 1.0 position.
Is that causing us more harm than benefit? Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a bigger discussion beyond this committee for your budget commission. You know, I think about the table that CFO Bracken just shared with the board. You know, these are the standards, this is what expected at every school, and then what level of flexibility is offered beyond that. Much of it goes to school climate and principal comfort or belief in ISS as a tool that works for them, and whether we want to impose top-down the idea that one model or another works.
I think too, we could be more strategic as a department, certainly in supporting some of these positions. I saw that by the Classroom Management Coaching Academy, and 48 people sign up overnight, basically. What are we doing to strategically support those ISS facilitators? Is it the person doesn't have training? They don't know what to do in there? Is that why it's not effective? So we need to do a better job with some of those positions, behavior specialist positions, all of those things. How are we actually leaning into those groups? And where do those groups even fall on an org chart? Right? Who's responsible to support them? So I've kind of, Chief Long and I have had this conversation. I've offered to kind of step in and kind of own some of those groups and really lean into them and support them more, because I believe that flexibility is chicken or egg. If you don't think it's effective, you're not going to do it. So if we have a program for it and support for it, I do think there's more belief and support for it at the local level too.
Okay, so with area of inquiry number 2, you need a consensus from us if we want to go with the recommendation from the committee or not. Is that what I'm hearing?
I personally don't support what I heard was the recommendation to not, have specific consideration. I think we need to be looking at, sending them to the At Promise Center or
Different
somewhere
approaches.
like that. Yeah, just a different, something
So
different.
I'm not in favor with suspending McKinney-Vento students. So I would like another approach dealing with those students. I don't know where you are.
I, again, am concerned about calling out essentially exempting one set of students or making a different set of rules for one set of students as opposed to another group of students, when we know that I think it's safe to say that any student who has a discipline issue has got something underlying going on. And whether that's homelessness or food insecurity or stress about a home situation or about parents or illness or whatever it is, I think they all have some underlying issue. And so my concern is setting a precedent for calling out one particular underlying issue as opposed to the others. What I would prefer to see is continue to apply discipline as outlined by Code of Conduct, but make sure that the application of that discipline is fully taking into account all of the different circumstances that our students find themselves in.
Sound like the same thing to me.
Yeah, so.
Well, no, it isn't, because I am in favor of taking the recommendation.
Yeah.
Because I think what Board Member Briscoe is saying, and I'm glad we're actually thinking and speaking through this, because it reminds me of an example that was given, and that's when you have, let's say, a McKinney-Vento student engage in a fight with another student. Maybe they're the aggressor. It could be battery, meaning the other student didn't even fight back, but the McKinney-Vento student attacked this student, and then that student shows back up the next day, or they find out that they won't ever find out. We will be discreet, but students know when discipline or consequences occur and when they don't. And then the same thing for, if you change this now, of course, we said excluding the dangerous offenses. So that's a safeguard. That's one guardrail.
Yep.
But
Right,
again,
which would make the example that you just gave not a part of an exception.
that would
No.
be an exception, because that's not a dangerous offense. But it
A
does
battery
make me
is
think
not a
of,
dangerous
Battery's
offense? That's interesting.
Dangerous offenses are firearms,
Mm-hmm.
drugs.
Serious violation.
yeah.
So what I want to be clear is, I'm not saying do not have any accountability or expectation for the students. If they do these different types of, offenses or whatever, they still need to be disciplined appropriately. What I'm saying is, I'm not in favor of, not being able to address the ones that are homeless, because they have nowhere to go. So the different approach for them, but not taking away the accountability and the expectation that they will be disciplined.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Because I believe at promise is an option.
It is an option.
Not like a requirement, right? And so what I'm saying is that perhaps it becomes a requirement in those cases and not an option.
Making it a requirement would also require us to provide transportation
Then do
to
it.
the Ed Promise Center.
Then do it.
So just,
Don't yet have an MOU with
And when
them.
we get all that together,
Well,
but for the sake of
yes.
time and the discussion right now, what we're saying is, we want to uphold the recommendation that was brought forth to us, or could we modify it based on a different approach, but still have the same accountability for these students, the same expectations that they will be disciplined. We understand your situation, you're homeless. So out of school suspension might not work for this student. We're talking about equity right now. So this is the other option, but you're still going to be disciplined. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Would it work to, because you already said, it sounds like we're saying the same thing, that we say continue to apply discipline as outlined by the Code of Conduct, taking into account the full range of circumstances presented by each student and situation, or words to that effect.
Yeah.
I'm making
I
this
guess
up out of my head
because
right
what I'm also hearing too is we're a little bit like chicken before the egg. So you guys haven't finished MOU with At Promise, right?
Right.
No, but I will say transportation is not in there.
Right. And so I think that's another side that like we have to address and deal with. State law just gave us a lot more flexibility around student transportation, and I think we should be taking advantage of it. And moreover, we have bigger conversations with the city around MARTA and access to our students that are happening in the background as well, that I think relieve a lot of these issues we keep seeing popping up all over the place, because student mobility is hindering a lot of our effectiveness. And so, yeah, I'm just saying, like, if yes, transportation needs to be a part of what we're doing with At Promise, but then too, like, I agree. Conduct, we still uphold conduct, we still uphold discipline. But for these students who have no place to go, you are required to go to the At Promise Center, and we're going to make sure you have the means to get there.
Or
Yeah,
like you
and I
said,
would
I'd like
say-
the idea of the modifications, because what if, and I'm just brainstorming, of course, my vote wasn't a part of it, it didn't count, but if the student, their only means of transportation is bus, so is there a modification around a MARTA card or a Lyft card, because that's their only means of transportation to getting to school? Maybe this school wanted to give them ISS, but, you know, I think we just have to be considerate, because in some cases, that's their only means of transportation. So
Correct.
if you suspend them from the bus, that could possibly happen. But if we have something in place to consider, then this will at least prevent any McKinney-Vento student going forward from being suspended from the bus, as well as some of those other suspensions.
And I will also add that this is something that we've been working on with Mayor Dickens and the Year of the Youth Committee. And just, this is good feedback to take to them. If we'll be in the future utilizing the At Promise Center, we need to see how the city can support with transportation around that as well.
Can
Board
I
Member
ask-
Briscoe Brown.
And again, I'm sorry, I have to keep going back to the procedural question. If this is not a policy issue, if this is code of conduct, which is really many, many levels below a board policy, is this whole discussion more informational than directive, and do we even need to be reaching consensus on it at this time?
It says policy considerations, number one, banning OSS for students identified as homely per McKinney-Vento law, excluding dangerous offenses. So this is a policy consideration for us. Am I correct, Erica Long, Nina Gupta? Or is this more regulation because?
An informational, contextual conversation, helping you all to understand how we administer the student discipline policy, code of conduct, but also responding to issues that you raised for us as a board. So over the past several months, as we talked about the landscape of our discipline picture across the district, you raised certain questions and issues that were instructive to us. Not instructive in the sense of, hey, superintendent, hey, administration, go do it this way, but caused us to have to think through how we carry this work out. I don't think a consensus from this committee is necessary at this point, because we're talking with a lot of detail about how we do the work of maintaining our classrooms and responding to disciplinary issues. And I think that we can discuss them, and it helps to inform you all as a committee, but we should err on the side of our administrative context and expertise around how this work plays out. For example, I reached out to social work and student assignment. This school year, we have about 2,000 students who are currently classified as McKinney-Vento. Now, that is a real life circumstance for them, but it also offers an administrative challenge for us. I would be concerned about putting out there for our schools and our principals that there is a number of students who we would not apply the discipline code to in the same way. And the very important contextual conversations you all have had here around looking at that student's lens as we apply discipline makes perfect sense to us as a team right now. I don't know how well that will be translated to the individual school level, the individual classroom level as these issues arise. And I just worry that someone will just hear shorthand, oh, you can't suspend this pretty substantial size group of students.
I appreciate that perspective, but as professionals who show up in the school, it is our job to understand the nuances of the needs and experiences of all our students. And how we apply instruction or how we apply discipline are all guided by this nuanced understanding of all of our students. To ask administrators to be intentional and hyper aware of the specific needs of students when applying discipline, I don't think is beyond the six-figure salaries that they receive. I think it's very doable, and I don't think it's too much to ask. And I think when it comes to protecting kids and doing what's right by kids, we need to be unafraid to ask adults to do the most and the best. Period.
Thank you. We will
Right.
move on to area inquiry 3.
Okay, area of inquiry 3. This one was dealing with banning out-of-school suspension for tardies or skipping. And of course, these are 2 attendance-related offenses. So the recommendations from the stakeholder committee was to revise the tardy and skipping in the code of conduct to reflect somewhat of a flip-flop, reflecting a less punitive consequence for being tardy to class or to school and a more punitive consequence for excessive skipping. And the next slide kind of gives a demonstration, a visual of how that looks. So currently for tardies, you could give up to a level 1 or a level 2. So for a student being tardy to class, they could receive a consequence as high as an out-of-school suspension. And it was proposed by the committee that, hey, that's too egregious, that's too much, that's too punitive, we want to drop it down to a level 1. The reason why we call it a flip-flop is because the current code of conduct for skipping only went up to a level 1. And I can remember the superintendent kind of giggling about this. And then, of course, the proposed skipping based on the committee was, hey, we think skipping, a student choosing to not come to school at all, or a student choosing to skip 2 entire classes or even 1 is a lot more egregious than that of a tardy. So the committee of adults, as well as even the student committee, both agreed that we needed to kind of up it up and increase the level of consequences for skipping. So they proposed that we add a level 2 to skipping, as opposed to currently it's just a level 1. So adding that level 2 for skipping hopefully will encourage students not to skip, because now they realize that it could be a more punitive consequence.
I confess, I've been bewildered by the fact that students are punished more severely for being late than they are for not showing up at all. It certainly seemed to encourage students who knew they were going to be late to just not come.
I will say, in defense of APS, the state actually has it outlined like that. We're just kind of undoing it and flipping it back, but that it did come from the state. It didn't originally come from us.
Just to clarify, the level 1 and level 2 shown here are for all offenses, not just for these offenses. These are the level 1 and level 2 consequences for all offenses throughout APS.
They differ. There are different options for different offenses. These are specifically the ones, the options available for tardies and skipping.
Okay. All right, good, thank you.
Is there ever an
Actually,
option?
level 1 is pretty consistent. Level 1 is pretty consistent. But what's different, if you look at the code of conduct, is some offenses don't even have a level 1 because they're that egregious. And then some offenses only go up to a level 1 or a level 2.
Well, yeah, and then obviously we had,
But as Ms. Montgomery mentioned, on the state level, both tardy and skipping was at a level 1.
okay.
Is there ever the option for Saturday schools?
It is, and it's always encouraged, but schools kind of frown upon it because of transportation, and when they attempt to get students to attend Saturday school, they don't attend. So now they are forced to, okay, well, wow, this student basically did not attend something they were assigned to, and they don't want to become more punitive by, okay, you didn't attend Saturday school, so now I have to go back to this detention or ISS or OSS.
I will come back, though. We have a budgeted option with ISS. There's just flexibility.
Understood.
All right. I think we got through the questions part of the presentation. I would thank you both for giving us this in-depth presentation on student discipline. Thank you.
Just point of clarification, maybe Ms. Long, you can answer this for me, but on that first inquiry, we talked about K3, we talked K5, we brought up a bunch of different things. What will become real?
I heard us landing on implementing that change on the K3 level to require cluster superintendent approval of out-of-school suspension. at some later date, we will look as an administration into expanding that, probably to K-8. But we would need to gather information about how it works at the K-3 level, how responsive and effective that cluster superintendent sign-off is, and what are the types of instances that are no longer subject to the out-of-school suspension because you have to get that extra sign-off.
Is there a willingness to at least go to 5th grade? Because you'd still be talking about the same principles. You're not expanding to middle school.
That makes sense to me. Can you all, Mr. Woods, Ms. Montgomery, can you all recall any potential heartburn from principals and APs around whether we did K-5 as opposed to K-3?
So remember, the committee's recommendation was to, was to remain with the current practice.
So I didn't want to do anything. All right, so I guess what I'm hearing is their recommendation doesn't help us.
Yeah, so for me, it didn't move the ball. So for me, that sounds like as leaders, let's decide to move that up to K-5, requiring the cluster superintendent sign off for the out-of-school suspensions. The board member makes a correct point. We're talking about the same principles, the same school communities. And then we
5th
can,
grade is the spike.
yeah, and
Yeah.
And it's at that 3-day mark. So 3 consecutive days,
so
we're at the 3rd day.
Can we also be intentional about monitoring 1 and 2 day suspensions and what those do? Because I could see a world where people go, well, I don't want the scrutiny of 3-day suspension, so I'm just going to give 2 days.
So that's why I think it's important to be either consecutive or non-consecutive. So either if you hit 3 in a row or if you get to your 3rd.
I would just like for us to continue, make sure we're monitoring what's happening with those shorter term ones, because if we see a spike there, then somebody's hiding their behavior by doing that, and we need to address it.
Is there
I'm
anything else?
good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
up next, we have a discussion around recommendations from our Retention and Placement Policy Committee.
We're just seeing a lot of you today, aren't we?
It's okay, it's all really good things. This one I'm really excited about.
We love Chelsea.
We do. We love you too. We love both of you.
So while he's getting this ready, this is Jennifer Williams. She's one of our MTSS coordinators here in APS. And she brought this to me last year, I guess. And we really leaned in and we're like, there has to be a better way to solve for this. So that is how we got here today. And with that, I'll let her start and then I'll jump in later.
Okay, great. So, hi, I'm Jennifer Williams again, and I wanted to kind of talk to you about the statement of the problem, right? So why are we here? Well, I don't know if you know, but we have about 75 kids currently that are at least 2 or more years behind our K-8. When we traced it back, what we found is there tends to be an issue with state placement regulations or student placement regulation because the state doesn't have any particular policy around overage, right? Oh, sorry. Oh, I didn't want to be broadcasted. Okay. Sorry. Wasn't ready for all that. Okay. And I'm not good. I'm ADHD, so standing still is also I'm going to have to work on it. Okay. But I'm passionate about it, so I can do this. So what happens is, so there's no overage policy at the state level, right? And so what happens is we have students who have basically, some of these babies have just disappeared into the ether. And we haven't seen them for 2 or 3 years. And so they'll come back and they'll be like, hey, I'm 17, but I only finished 6th grade. What do we do, right? And right now, we enroll them in 6th grade, which is crazy, right, in my opinion. And so when we enroll them, that's kind of the problem. And then they end up going through a big procedure, right, where they can get moved up, but the procedure is so cumbersome to not only schools, but really just, Shivy, when you were talking about an equitable issue, the problem is some schools, they recognize these kids are overage. Some schools don't. So it's really not, done equitably either. And so what we, actually I also want to add about research. I think that is important. But and I think it's also just common sense, right? Like, kids who are 2 or more years behind, they have a negative attitude about school. They have a lower self-esteem. You know, they may be the big man on campus, but down deep, when it comes to school and their academics and how they actually feel about, you know, where they're going in life, it tends to be lower. They develop poorer social skills, and they're less likely to even pursue any kind of post-secondary plans, and frankly, they're 2 to 11 times more likely to drop out of school. And this isn't on here, but there are also some of our behavior issues as well, right? Because they're just disengaged. Oops, wrong way. There we go. So this is just a little layout for you, so you can see the number of kids right now that are currently 2 or more years behind. You can see our big grades are 6th grade, we have 19 kids, and then 8th, we have about 12, and then you can see they're kind of spattered throughout. And you may say, well, kindergarten, how is kindergarten? Well, so number one, the kindergarten, sometimes parents just don't, they want their kids to be in kindergarten, and they may enroll them, and, you know, maybe, honestly, there's not really a great reason. I don't know. I'm not really, but I will say sometimes, at least for the year behind, you know, parents will hold kids out, right? And it's kind of we call it red start, but, you know, you're not supposed to do it, but you do. However, and especially, like, let's say they have a late birthday, you know, or their birthday's in August, that happens. But again, I'm more concerned with, like, once you get into, like, 2nd, 3rd, and you get babies who are, we have them right now in 3rd grade that are 10, 11 years old. So that's kind of where we are. You can see this is the area too, and again, when you think about equity, you know, equity and being equitable, we see our, you know, our bigger clusters like Douglas, Mays. That's where we're going to see the majority of our kids that are 2 or more years behind. And then you can see, here's the issue. So you may say, okay, well, why does every kid that's not 2 or more years behind, why do they not have an intervention plan? Well, some of them don't need one. I mean, frankly, like, I'll give you an example just to be personal. We have a young lady that, you know, in one of our schools that is a Georgia scholar. She's 17 and she was in the middle school, okay? So bright as she could be, but life circumstances and things happen along the way to where she got to that place, right? We've moved her up, she is thriving, right? But if we hadn't, we just think about what could have happened to her through no fault of her own. And that's the thing too. We have to remember these are little students, right? I consider them babies. And so being K-8, most of the reasons why they're not there is really no fault of their own. This isn't in the training, or the video, the PowerPoint, thank you. But it's because some of them just, after COVID, didn't come back. Or actually, maybe there, let me see. Okay, there we go. So some of them didn't come back after COVID. Literally, just didn't come back. But also, though, we have to be realistic. They didn't come back because they lost housing or because family members died or because of trauma. You know what I mean? It just wasn't the parents just didn't want to bring them back. And then also, when they came back, they had a hard time enrolling, not just in APS, but just in general, because they may not have all the documents they need. It's just, you know, there's a lot of barriers to that. Transient. Y'all know how transient we are, right? And most of our kids who are 2 or more years behind actually aren't homegrown APS kids. They have been from other districts, and they've come in from other districts. Many of them, you know, well, some of them, not many, but some of them have been retained 2-3 times in, like, 1st grade, right? Just things that we wouldn't do, but it's happened to them, and we still need to make sure to do what's right by them. Some have been retained, but honestly, retention is not the biggest reason. What we found, also absent. Y'all, they will come, they'll come in September, and then they just disappear, and they don't, and the way our policy is set up right now, you know, if they withdraw, we don't always know where they are or where they're going, you know, and so then they come back in May, and we're like, where have you been? Like, what's been going on? Or they come back 2 years later, which literally happens, and, you know, they're enrolled in the same school, and so, you know, those are kind of the stopped during the year. If you just stop in the middle of the year, then you're not promoted, so then if you come back, then you're going to be considered, you know, you're retained again. So I'm going to I told you the rationale and the reason why, so this is what we would like to do about it. So.
I've been very anxious to get this in front of you, so I'm very excited, and I see your faces and reactions to this. It is alarming.
So ultimately, where we are is our current policy does not address the number of times students have been retained, and it doesn't address the age of the student. Current policy really looks at what they last completed rather than an age-based placement for consideration. So these are the long slides. This is our current board policy on promotion and retention. So we actually are not making proposals to change the policy. We're looking at an addendum, and we're looking at changes to the regulation. But we thought it was still really important to bring it to you.
Just to be,
Oh, sorry.
just to
Okay.
be clear,
Correct me.
that addendum would be a change to the policy. If you look at the document that looks like this, the second paragraph would be entirely new language that accomplishes what Chelsea and Jennifer are laying out right here. So the second paragraph would include the prohibition on the number of years they can be retained and that age language. And then following up with the policy change are other changes to the admin regulation that we'll make on our side.
Thank you, Chief Long, keeping us in line over here. So this is the recommended updates to the board regulation. So at the beginning of each semester, schools will pull their overage list and determine if any students are more than 2 years behind. Now, hopefully, with these changes, this will never happen again. This truly is a prevention policy to keep this from ever occurring from here forward. And the placement committee then will work with the contacts that these things all happen. We're just adding them to the regulation, or we're proposing adding it to the regulation at this point. This is how we're handling these things.
I do have a question around this, promotion and retention.
Yes.
The promotion part, say you have a student that's been out for a certain amount of time, they come back, they complete, especially in high school, they complete all their credits to get promoted to the next grade. Is this part of this policy?
So that's a really good call out. This policy is really about that placement in K-8. In
K-8.
high school, it's all about your credits.
All about
so
credits,
you
okay.
promote yourself in high school by earning those credits. This is strictly about K-8 placements and making sure that a student is not more than 1 year behind because of our placement.
Hours, okay, gotcha.
And
Just
Madam
wanna
Chair,
clarify it.
during last school year, the superintendent updated the administrative regulation to allow for that mid-year promotion at the high school level.
Yes, it seems to me that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, and I mean that because I may well be, that overage and retained can be two different things. And you call it out in the slide with the circles on it, I think it was number 6, where one of the reasons is students started school at a later age. And I'm reminded of this because my son was the youngest kid in the kindergarten when he started, and the oldest was 21 months older than he was. The difference between, I was trying to get him out of there, and the difference between, and the one who was 21 months older, their stated reason was they wanted him to be big for football. This is the South.
Yep. Yep.
But there were 7 kids in his class who turned 7 before the end of the kindergarten year. And so my question is, I recognize that that is a totally different problem, but it does play into this. And so is there anything we can do to prevent that issue where because of parent choice or for whatever reason the student starts school before that 5 or 6 year, after that 5 or 6 year kindergarten or the corresponding ages going forward. Because at some point, the kid in my son's class who turned 8 shortly after the end of kindergarten would actually fall into this under the overage rule. By the time they get to middle school and high school, they're going to be overage. Is that something that we also need to look at?
So I would say our retention processes are actually very, very tight. They all go through our MTSS coordinators. The cluster superintendents have to sign off on them. It's not easy or taken lightly to retain a child in APS. We have very, very good rules and policies around retention. we actually went through every single one of these students, Doug, to really understand how they got there. They weren't because of retention. It was because of missing a chunk of school and just reappearing. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so,
And also to answer your question, so when it comes to kindergarten, the way it was explained to me, maybe because I don't know if it's a policy, but what we basically allow is, so if a parent wants to, let's say, my son's birthday's in June, right? So
As
let's
is
say,
mine, by
okay,
the
right.
way.
So I'm like you, honey. He went to school. Okay, so he's at one of the schools here in APS now, but he was ready, right? And so I knew he was ready. There are kids that aren't. And so what we allow is a parent can work with, their cluster superintendent and the principal to make decisions, right, in the best interest of the child. But that's only for one. So there should never be a case where you can't register a child that's 2 years behind or that's 7, for kindergarten. And like I said, even for those that are up here right now, there's probably some reasoning that we need to look into that may have happened. And it could be, that they came from out of state, that they were already in kindergarten. Like there's reasoning why. But we do have, guardrails in place that wouldn't allow that to happen. But what we don't have is, what we're not looking at, when we say overage, I want to be very clear, we're talking about 2 or more years behind. We're not talking about that year behind, right? So it's kind of like, that's because if we did that, nobody would ever be able to be retained at all. So we do give them that leeway, but that's what keeps them from being 2 or more.
okay,
Yes,
thank you. I am glad to hear that's more difficult now than it was because, the
No
difference-
driving to middle school. That's what we're
the
not.
difference between 5 and 7 is huge.
Yes.
Okay, so the recommendation here is to add
Add
this,
the language. Yep.
this paragraph.
It should have printed in red, but yes, that's all new language, the second paragraph of the policy.
Clarifying questions.
Go ahead, Board Member Brooks.
It's all them B's up here.
BBBs.
Right. On that one chart that we had that showed like all the different reasons that students were there, I guess what it would have been helpful in it, again, it's only 70 kids, but it's 70 kids, right?
5.
How much of this is attributed to poverty?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say
Okay.
Yeah, most of it's going to be, oh, sorry, okay. Yes, yes, 99% of it. But there's I haven't come across a student yet that, was just, that's been retained twice, that wasn't retained because they were transient or because they, maybe they lost their house and they were homeless, or because they just stopped attending school because mom had cancer. Poverty plays a huge, poverty and trauma play huge roles into all of this.
Poverty is traumatic.
Right.
Yeah.
Poverty is traumatic.
There were some
and-
too that were childcare.
Right.
They were providing childcare for younger siblings and just kind of got caught up and kept doing it. That came up as well. But
Yep.
same.
Poverty essentially, right?
Yep,
Mom can't pay
absolutely.
for childcare, so you got to hold it down at home. Yeah, I asked that because it does loop us back into the conversation we just had about discipline and why we have to be intentional about the nuance of poverty and the impact that it has, and why we have to really go about it differently than we do for others. If we adopted the changes that you all are asking for, what would that do to those 70 students? What would that do for them today?
I'll be moving forward. And then I have one question before we move forward. Is it still state law that parents have up until 1st grade to enroll their child in school in the state of Georgia?
Yeah, kindergarten is not mandatory.
Huh?
Kindergarten is not mandatory.
Not mandatory, yeah, okay.
And I guess my last question was, we bring all these kids up to speed, put them in the proper grades that they should be in. What are we doing to support them? And that was my last question.
Got it. Go ahead.
Perfect segue. So part 1, the good thing is if we make this change, this won't happen anymore. So at this point, it is, if we make the change, we won't have kids placed by APS 2 or more grade levels behind. So that it's a phenomenal prevention thing. There will be a hard stop that this will not occur anymore. So part 2 then is, if we are going to make this change, what about, and at the time we did this at 69, we just reran the numbers, so now it's 75. how do we right size, quote unquote, this group of students? Because if we're not going to let it happen anymore, I do feel like we have an obligation to fix it for these kids. So the current procedures, if you are interested, is this is how a placement team looks at this process. So our MTSS coordinators keep a real tight, specifically Jennifer, on who these kids are, making sure there is a cross-functional team that looks at that placement, how, should we make these jumps, right? And remember, to jump a 7th grader or 8th grader to high school, they still have to earn those credits, even if we change their grade level. So these are the quote-unquote best practices, free recommendations, right? So any student that we would move forward, these are the different things that we would make sure are in place. So the individual learning plans, look at small group tutoring, differentiated instructions, credit recovery options if we're moving them up to high school, any sort of a dedicated school counselor approach, peer mentoring programs, positive school climate initiatives, career counseling, work-based learning, really lean into those things. Especially those 7th and 8th graders that are going to go to high school, they're ready. They're very ready, but we have to make sure we have really supportive, intensive plans before we just drop them on campus. What online learning do we have? What AVA do we have? What summer school do we have? What can Phoenix do? Making sure they have those tiered intervention plans if appropriate. How's the family involved? The last thing we want to happen is that these kids fall back off, right? Because it is hard to reintegrate and jump in these situations. But a really individualized approach, really intensive progress monitoring to make sure everything is going okay. These are the things that we should just do. Frankly, we should do these for most kids. So a budgeted option, and I will say we're exploring this. I had a conversation with Lindsay Evans in federal programs to see if there's any federal programs, things that we can lean into this, because remember, this would be a one-time thing, because if we adopt this policy, this isn't going to happen anymore. So how do we support these 75 in the meantime? A standards and skill deficit-based approach, so looking at their reading skills. Can they read fluently enough and comprehend well enough to make that jump? Do they have those basic math skills to jump into Algebra 1? Those big, especially if we look at how many kids would be changing actual school levels. With a certified teacher, potentially virtual, 2 hours per day, 4 days a week. And then, just kind of wrapping our brains around, is this something they would have to complete to do that right sizing or not? Just some understanding of what the cost would be around something like this is a 4 or 6 week approach. 4 weeks would be about $96,000. A 6 week approach would be at $144,000. So it's not an inexpensive approach. Or do we just look at kids that are at those transition grades? At the time when we pulled this data, interestingly, 43 of the 69 would actually transition schools. So when you think about big kids in elementary school and big kids in middle school, that's actually how many kids would change school levels if we did this. And then again, just looking at some costs, playing around with some numbers, and we are looking at if there is any option for a federal program's spend to do this, because again, one time only, we wouldn't have to do this again. And then this is just who was on the committee when we made these considerations and when we met.
Do we have a breakdown of what schools would be impacted? Like, is that something like maybe offline, if it's not here, that you can give to us?
We have it.
Here, and I think I would be,
Yeah.
so I think I would be remiss without bringing up our high school, right? Because that is a concern that I have, that our high school principals have, that it's just realistic. If we take the children from 7th grade to 9th grade, that's their cohort. They start it, right? And so we do have to make sure we're setting them up for success. However, we have to also consider if we let them start, like let's just say we say, okay, you just keep on going the way you're going, it's still going to affect their cohort because they're 17 starting high school and they're not going to graduate on time. So there's, and our principals are generally, the ones that I have worked with have been very open with it. All they're asking from us is like, help us figure out a way to get them, to support these students and to I don't want to say fast track, but to ensure that they just do. They have to be able to complete their credits at a faster pace. And that's why we said AVA and Phoenix would play integral parts in all of this. And so I did want to point that out because I think so you can see right now we have seven kids right now that will go from, if this were to be approved, 11 kids in 7th grade that would go from this age until to start ninth grade. Yes, I'm going to get it out. And then the eighth graders, we can't fast. I mean, they're already promoted to ninth grade. So that 12 students, what we're going to have to do is we just work with high schools to ensure they know they're overage, and we're going to make sure that, they have a plan in place for them.
Yeah.
But then may I go back? I'm sorry, can we go back to school? Oh, and you know what? We do not have, so I can send you that. I have the schools, yes. I have it listed out, but I will say, the ones, I think I wrote it down here for you. I may not have, but I know that like Douglas, so like John Lewis to Douglas, and then from Young to Mays, those students, those are our seventh graders. Those are going to be our highest number of students. So, but the highest, so I told Chelsea this too though, but the biggest is still 3. So 3, so in other words, when you divide it up by schools, you have 3 students that are going to affect your cohort.
Got you.
That's the largest. So, I feel like that's something we can live with,
It can be done.
And may I say one more thing? Sorry.
Yeah.
I just think it's important to note that even though students are 2 or more years behind, we have to understand if we do move them up 1 grade level, there are still other peers in that grade level that may be on their same reading level. So in other words, what we're not doing is taking a student that is, and putting them somewhere where they will have no support or where support isn't already built into the school, to make sure that they are successful and growing the way that they need to. And many of these students are already developing and proficient anyway, so.
My only recommendation, I heard about this organization who does some good work with us apparently called 100 Black Men, and I could really see a good opportunity for mentorship for some of these young people and kind of making sure that is a part of their support. 100 Black Men or any other organization in collaboration with Atlanta, with APS, but I would encourage that piece too.
Thank you. Board Member Briscoe Brown?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I don't know, we have no data here on male, female, other, but, I don't know whether the Jackson Jills would be able to
100
help
Black
us
Men
as well.
mentored the young ladies too, though.
Yeah.
We do
Yeah.
the young ladies as well.
I can give it to you, but I will say, generally speaking, it's very much
It's
our
boys.
young men
Yeah,
over
it's
our
boys.
young ladies.
I like what I'm seeing here in terms of the support that we would give these students. I want to emphasize that I think it will be very important to give them social emotional support, because moving from 7th grade to 9th grade, no matter whether you're the right age for 9th grade or the right age for 7th grade, is very different socially. If we're talking about doing this, let me ask, are we talking about moving them more or less immediately, I mean mid-year, or are we going to we'll wait until the fall? But it will still be fairly obvious that students have been, that this is someone who has not been in the class before, who is now, and particularly if they're going into the cohort they were once in, there are going to be other students that know what their story is, whatever that story is about retention. So I think it will be very important to find ways to provide very specific emotional and social support to these students.
Yeah, I'll say too, the best thing about this group of kids is they are highly motivated. They really want to move up. They want to get closer to where they should be in grade level, especially as older as they get. They know. Because really, even if you're talking about 6th graders, moving them to 8th grade or moving them to 7th grade, like they're so far off. They know and they want to be successful. It's a really motivating factor for a lot of these kids. They just need arms wrapped around them.
Which leads me to the next question I was going to ask, which is about the summer program and whether you think that these students would really be motivated to do that. It sounds like they might be.
Yeah, some of them are academically okay. They've clearly kept reading while they were home or while they were out. That's not the majority. But yes, I think, especially if we said we need you to do this to right size, but I don't know that we would have to convince quite that many. Maybe for parental support. But yes, and the little ones, don't realize it as much, I don't think, as the older ones. But I mean, the way that this stands, every student you see on this chart would be beginning high school at 17.
Would it be possible to run the summer program just as part of our regular summer school?
We're exploring kind of all of our options. Again, Lindsay and I talked first, but then looking at summer school too, and how could we get them connected? What virtual resources can we use? We're looking at all the options. We just kind of started with one. We started with the, Bentley Cadillac version, and we'll keep looking.
Madam Chair or Ms. Long, what would be needed from us to, I guess, get this in front of the whole board for vote? 'Cause
So that's what we're doing now.
yeah, okay.
So
we
this is
running it.
first
Okay.
read, and then I can say it now. Are we in agreement that we'll move this on to the board for final adoption? Are there any changes that need to be made, or are we agreeing with what the context and the wording is that they have provided us today?
I think it would be for first read.
It is for first read today.
Okay. Well, for first read at the board meeting.
Yeah, we're getting it out of policy committee to go to the board.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
You said final adoption, and I didn't know whether you were proposing to waive
out of
first read.
here,
Yes.
get it out.
There is a typo on the second line of the second paragraph
Yes,
that we just need to correct.
Oh, I see, students who,
Yeah.
yep, thank you.
But other than that, I'm in favor of moving this on for
To
first read
to
at
the full board.
at the February board meeting.
With it.
Let me just add some point of clarification on that scheduling. Of course, you all are in your one-on-one meetings now. Are you okay with, I guess there may have been one or two board members who've had theirs already?
I've had mine already. I can live
I've
with it.
had mine.
Yeah, I have mine.
Over half have, okay.
Who is not on this dais, who has not had their one-on-one yet?
All of us had them on the dais.
Okay, so the ones that are not on the dais are largely the ones that have not had their one-on-ones yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I think we
so-
have maybe a policy placement on hold on the agenda, so we can go back around and add this. And then we'll send an email update to let everyone know.
I'd also ask that maybe y'all be prepared to speak briefly to it. I
Yes.
don't know that we need to go to this level in the board meeting, but if we can do that briefly at the board, just be prepared to do that in case any of our colleagues have any questions,
Yeah, or we can send them the YouTube link for today's meeting.
or just the
Do your
PowerPoint.
homework.
Oh, yes, Board Member Alden.
So if this gets moved, would it be moved under the discussion and action part so that we'll have time to talk about it, or would it be the first read on consent? How does that
It
work?
would be the first read because we're not adopting it.
Right, on consent or discussion and action?
It's not on consent because we're not adopting it, so it would be, have to be on discussion and action.
Okay,
for
I just
first
need
read.
to
I mean, discussion, I'm sorry, not action.
Under
Yes.
consent, yeah.
But are we adopting it on February? No, you're not. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get to. Yes, okay.
So
So I
that
was
would
just
be-
asking, because if it's on consent, then there's not necessarily a conversation or an introduction to colleagues. And since we have not had the chance to have the conversation in our one-to-ones, is it possible that it does not sit on consent,
And
just
then
so
again, into
folks can
discussion.
hear the work?
It can certainly be placed under the discussion and action, and even when you vote on it, you're still just voting on it
first read.
As a first read? Excellent. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Nina. So let's move on to the February board meeting, February 3rd, which is my daughter's birthday. Yay, turning 13.
Did I hear quick meeting? Is that what I heard?
No. Birthday party is Saturday, so no, we're good. But thank you, Chelsea Montgomery and Miss Williams, for your presentation today on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, policy GAG, staff conflict of interest for discussion.
I don't know, but it looks like it's just bad. So, we've talked about this. You all have talked about our staff conflict of interest policy as a committee before. I thought it would be helpful today to bring up some examples from other metro school districts, just to show you where I might need to go down to the podium. just to show where your policy stacks up against some of our neighboring districts. On the screen before you right now is our current staff conflict of interest policy. It includes several provisions around the employee's duty, how they do business, and not doing business directly with the district, using their influence or authority as an APS official to sell or effect a sale, et cetera, et cetera. And then if I can, how do I tab over to the next document? Okay, so if you click to the next one, here is Fulton County Schools, their staff conflict of interest policy. They lay out definitions of several terms. I think we have those spelled out fairly well in our policy already. There's a section on standards and guidelines around hiring and promotion of relatives. A separate section on placement, just to make sure there's no conflict there. A paragraph around nepotism, as well as examples and requiring disclosure for employees when there is that relationship by blood or marriage. So that's Fulton County. You'll notice that the Fulton County example does not speak to some of the issues you've wondered about as a committee. It does not speak to tutoring for pay, and it doesn't even speak to employees doing business with the district. Let's tab over to the next one, Cherokee County. Their conflict of interest first addresses remuneration and employees accepting gifts. It sets a sort of generous gift cap of $250 annually from booster clubs, parent organizations, groups, students, or parents. There's a section around accepting payments for extracurricular responsibilities. And it says that employees may accept additional payments from third parties for extracurricular responsibilities upon approval of the superintendent. And it defines those payments as money paid. There's a section here around providing coaching, instruction, or other services for a fee. Employees may accept employment from third parties for district or student-related activities with written approval. And some of those examples that could be approved include coaching, instructing, or promoting athletic camps, soliciting students or parents of students to purchase equipment, supplies, or services from the employee, providing tutoring, additional instruction, or aftercare for payment to students under the employee's authority or supervision. So we see here Cherokee County is allowing that pay for tutoring, but it just sets out a requirement for prior written approval of the superintendent or designee. Let's scroll down a little bit more on that one. An entire section about employment of relatives. I think our policy covers this pretty well. And then if we scroll down some more, see if there's anything else there from Cherokee. Okay, and our last example from the metro area is Gwinnett County. It says that employees may not give a written oral endorsement to any company or representative for the services and the goods that they're offering to the district. There's a provision around non-school employment, just reminding employees that their job assignments are their first obligation, and they cannot have outside employment that takes time away from that obligation. It says that principal supervisors would have the responsibility for evaluating the effects of outside employee. And then there's a section on personnel tutoring and coaching for pay. For Gwinnett County, they say that the gifts or money by certificated personnel cannot come from students under their supervision during that school year. So the 7th grade math teacher can tutor a 6th grade student or an 8th grade student. And there are ways that the principal, the teacher, it shows how they can agree that a tutoring would be beneficial. But it just goes into specifics around teachers offering this. that may be helpful as you're considering where we are with our policy. There's a provision here as well around political involvement and employment of relatives, which again, I think we have, we do a pretty good job of covering in ours. I have not found, in my scan of Georgia policies for school districts, I have not found any that address restrictions on activities with the district after a person is employed here. You might remember we raised the issue of whether it's a matter of a conflict of interest or an ethical issue when a person leaves their district employment and then turns around and does business with the district in some form, whether it's going to work for an organization that does business with the district, aligned to what they were doing before, or leaving district employment and then offering their expertise and their services up as a vendor or a contractor themselves. I have not found where those issues are addressed within the staff conflict of interest policies. I think they may lend more to some post-employment ethical obligations or other structures that I don't see that Georgia districts have taken on.
And then I also would like to bring a point up is if an employee leave on bad terms or involved with some type of lawsuit with our district, then they come back and work with the district as a consultant or through a contract situation. I do feel that needs to be addressed in policy.
Yeah, yes. And I don't know if we can, if a policy is a good place for that, or maybe administrative regulation. I do think, particularly when you're talking about employees who are adverse parties to the district, that leads into legal questions that may be best addressed through those processes.
Isn't there a code or a designation of not eligible for rehire?
There is. So when an employee is removed for cause, there is a do not rehire or ineligible for rehire. I'm not going to share any strategy around, mutually agreed upon separation agreements or anything like that, but we can protect the district in that way as well. Where there are sometimes issues is when an employee may go work for a vendor. And the vendor assigns that employee back to APS. That we would not have as much advanced visibility into control. Because technically, we're not rehiring that employee, but that former employee is still providing services to APS through a vendor. And that, I think, is a problem that absolutely can be fixed, but it's an administrative regulation, I think, expectations.
If we wanted to address, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. If we wanted to address former employees coming back and, or you quit or you get fired and then you essentially come back as a contractor like immediately right away, I understood that administration was looking to try to have like a cooling off period effectively. And I'm wondering, is this not something that should be done on the procurement side instead of this conflict of interest side? And I think I asked this question last time.
So that can certainly be part of the procurement manual. That can be done administratively. That does not need to be done through policy.
Right. So they could get what they want on that side. But then as far as, this is a lot to glean from in regards to our posture for teachers tutoring and whether or not you can get paid to tutor and or paid to be a private athletic coach or whatever the case may be. And I did find it very authoritarian of us, the way our policy currently reads, that you cannot be paid to tutor a kid anywhere across APS. I'm like, who are the best people to tutor our kids? All right, probably a teacher. Now, I do like the nuance of what I saw in the Gwinnett policy that essentially said they couldn't be a child of record on your, your current roster and you couldn't get paid. I like that carve out. But I don't see a reason why the teacher across the hall couldn't get hired by a family,
I think, I think we're definitely behind some of our neighboring districts in terms of how we consider that student-teacher relationship around tutoring and even around other things that teachers might do, whether they're selling some good
Yeah.
to an audience that might include some of their students. So I think between Gwinnett and Cherokee, there's good language there that we can bring back for potential first read, just to modernize our approach around there.
I'm also interested in getting feedback from you all about your perspectives on teachers vending with the district. So I know, for example, in Clayton, if I wanted to print T-shirts for my school or print T-shirts for the district, I could get a vendor application with Clayton County, and I could provide that service. In APS, we have a very different posture. So I'm just curious as to, where we are there when we know many of our teachers have businesses and are service providers, and why not pay them to do it if they could do it?
There's no law against it. I will say that a lot of the ethics and conflicts of interest policies, and I suspect APSs may have been born out of this as well. I do remember before any of our time here with APS, that there had been neighboring school districts that got into a lot of heat for administrators writing a book and then selling lots of copies to the school
That was
district.
very specific.
And but that's,
It's a good example.
That's what I remember, right? And there may have been nothing untoward about it, but it sure didn't. The news sure didn't make it look that way, and the community sure didn't take it that way. And so those firewalls. There are times when it is perfectly appropriate for one of our employees who has a totally independent business to support APS and do business with us. But because of the closeness of the relationship, there's always that appearance of favoritism, potentially, unless you build in additional safeguards and firewalls.
Are
And
there any safeguards you would recommend?
Agitating on that.
Okay, good word.
Thank you.
I'm gonna write that down. That's my word of the day. Say it again.
I worry.
Cogitating.
Cogitating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worry about even our procurement team's capacity to check for all of the things, all the potential conflicts that could arise when current employees are doing business with the district in some separate manner. Even, and we will have to look into that cooling off period question and adding that into procurement practices, but that's gonna require looking beyond that company's name to determine who are the people involved with that company, and are those people, is any of, some of the covered former personnel. It's not quite as easy as plugging names into a directory.
I wonder if that's something we ask our vendors to disclose as a part of our agreement to do business with them. That if you have a former APS employee who would be a part of a project or a service delivery, that it be disclosed, that we ask for the disclosure. And maybe it's a period of time, 2 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Board Member Briscoe Brown.
Yeah, I want to talk about the one about accepting gifts. That we have, there is a wide range of perspectives on this among the different policies, it looks like. One of them looks, I'm not sure who this is, but one of them says $250.
Yeah, that's Cherokee County.
Okay, and there's one that really doesn't address it at all, and then ours says $50 from anyone who is interested in business dealings. So that limits, a parent can give a gift, but a potential vendor can't give a gift. And then there's another one, and I can't even tell you what it says right now. But are there thoughts from administration about whether that particular provision needs to be revised? $50 is a very, very small amount of money in today's world.
I tend to be a little bit of a stickler about this type of thing.
And maybe it needs to be zero, but
And I say that because, we're making $1 billion+ decisions every day on based on the generosity of our stakeholders and our taxpayers. And decisions about vendors that we engage with, organizations with whom we do business, I just worry about clouding that decision-making process, and it leading to undesirable results for our students. To me, $50 is a meal, an appropriate meal, and to me, that's pretty much the limit of what that gives.
And I do want to point out that that provision is in our charter as well. So even if even if there was a consensus to change it in policy, that isn't going to get it done.
You're right, you're right.
Are y'all talking
I'm-
about
and-
this?
And I'm not, I'm sorry, I'm not proposing changing it. I just wondered whether that needed to be part of the discussion, and specifically that it is limited to business dealings with the school system. So even though it says from any student, parent, et cetera, it's got to be one who is interested in business dealings with the school system.
I almost felt like we were having two different conversations though, like, cause I think I'm hearing it from the lens of like, you're thinking about your own personal experience as a person who pulls levers on certain things, as opposed to a teacher receiving a gift. I think those are two very different conversations.
I think you are right about that. My personal opinion is that a $250 gift to a teacher at the end of the school year may be so generous that it cloudies the relationship.
A $250 gift is a pair of Jordans.
I think that's a big deal.
I think that's a lot.
I think that's a big deal.
And I hear what you're saying, because at the end of the year, it's very intense, as I learned being on the board. And
Okay.
and
Okay.
when a gift of a high value pops into my lap and Johnny isn't doing so well, but their parents gave me this wonderful gift, it clouds the memory of passing Johnny and I.
Where are these parents? Where are these parents?
So, and then on the other end, when you okay, so as board members, people like take us out all the time, or if they want to or whatever, right?
I hear that.
That, our oath of office said that we cannot be swayed to make decisions based on favors or whatever. I don't know the correct language, but we take an oath saying that we will not be compromised to make decisions based on or persuasion or whatever. So then you have that piece, and then you have the other piece with, being a teacher receiving a gift, and then the vendor piece and all that stuff. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are two different situations, but if you keep it under a certain amount or at a certain amount, and it is in our charter, then that keeps that compromising low, or the persuasion of doing something out of a generosity because you were giving a gift or whatever it might
What's
be.
the limit in the charter?
Huh?
What's the limit in the charter?
$50.
All right, let it live at 50.
Yeah.
I mean, you get, look, they gonna be the for sale Jordans and the Marshall Jordans, but
Is there anything we need to do with this policy? I know it was open for discussion.
No, but we'll bring back the tutoring language. I think that's
Yes.
definitely a point
Yeah.
where we need to come into the modern age. The tutoring language, as well as some of the other
the
language.
promotion of a business.
Yeah,
Yes.
promotion of
We
it.
did bring that
Yeah,
up,
that one is wild.
Yeah, and then I think we talked about the example of a teacher who might put together a college tour trip. And they should be able to put up a poster promoting that. And
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So I know we're running tight on time, about 4 minutes left. I would love for Ashley Potts to come up and give us a high-level overview on the policy diet with the Council of Great City Schools, the work we've been doing under student outcome-focused governance work. I provided everyone with a policy diet document. Hello, Coach Ashley Paz. You're on the mic.
How's that? Can you hear me now? It's great to see everyone today. I'm looking forward to the time we're about to spend together as well. So I'm going to keep this pretty quick and tight because I know that we are on a timeline. Why do school boards do policy diets? This really is guided by the question of how much policy is too much policy. There is kind of the old school way of thinking about board policy, or really any policy from any elected body. Are we keeping policies on the books just for the sake of keeping them on the books? Are we keeping policies on the books because they have served us in the past, but maybe are no longer serving us today? Those are really some of the guiding questions about the policy diet. But really the key question is, how much time is the board spending in your board meetings and in the work that you do in general as a school board? How much time are you spending really deliberating policies? And are the policies that you are spending your time deliberating actually helping you cause improvements for how student outcomes are improving across your school system? Or are we discussing and deliberating policies that are really just kind of that motion, kind of spinning the wheel, but not really creating the future that we intend for our students? And then also, so that's the first and most important, is about how the board is spending its time. And then the second question in the policy diet is how is the board engaging with policy that is actually intended to be within the board's locus of control? How much of the board's policy is focused on board work? And then how much of it is actually administrative policy that your superintendent should be really the one who is responsible for developing and then accountable to the board for ensuring that it is followed? And when you as a board have adopted goals, when you've adopted guardrails that are consistent with the community's vision and the community's values, then policy can be aligned in a way so that that is the superintendent's primary focus. That does not suggest that everything else is not important. And of course, there are things that you are legally required to have on the books. And so the policy diet process takes you through how to review your policy and identify what's working for us and what's not working for us, what's helping us create the future we intend, and which policies are maybe slowing us down. That's my high-level overview. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. And thank you, Coach Paz. One of the things that we did discuss is that we want to wait until we have our goals and guardrails in place and strategic plan before we dive into the policy diet to ensure there is an alignment with those goals and the focus of the district within policy. So I open it up for any questions around this before we transition. Yes, Board Member Briscoe Brown.
Yeah, thank you, and just thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to what we're also getting ready to do next. I didn't get the document until I was sitting on the dais this afternoon. I'd really like to go through that in some detail.
Of course.
And then maybe just schedule a time to talk with you about how that works.
Yeah, of course. And I'm open to meet with any board members at any time, but we can absolutely schedule that time to happen.
Okay.
Any other question, feedback, input, and concerns? All right. Well, thank you very much. This has been a
Thank
very
you.
productive policy meeting. And with that being said, is there any other business to discuss? Seeing and hearing none. Is there any public comment?
No, Madam Chair, no public comment.
Okay, with that being said, is there a motion to adjourn the January 29, 2025 Policy Committee meeting?
So moved?
Second.
Properly moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, second by Board Member Brooks. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.